Okay, so if you've been joining us, we've been developing an SQLite helper um, to help us to create our application, which will allow us to add some information to the database. So we've just done with the back end, which is just creating our connection to the database, SQLite, creating our functions that's going to help us to insert and also delete and read. Um, So the next bit of what we're going to do is we're actually going to focus on the Jetpack Compose side. So I'm going to go back to my main activity.kt, and then we're going to start to develop what we need to develop. So the first we need to do is we are going to use our database helper. So we have to try and import our DB helper, because remember that the DB helper is going to help us to be able to manage our project well. So we are going to create an object from that DB helper because it's a class. So we're going to create an object from it. So DB helper, and then we're going to pass in the this keyword. Now, if you remember, one second, I need to put this outside of set content. One second. DB helper, super on create. Let's have a look. Unexpected use the separate expression on the same line. One second. Move the edge to edge. Set content. Okay. I'm writing it wrong. Sorry. I'm ahead. I was wondering why I wasn't working. So we have our DB helper equals to database helper, because remember that is the database helper. That's our class. And then we are trying to import, we're trying to create an object from that particular database helper. So we're trying to create an object from it. So we have our DB helper now. We could have left that edge thing in there, but we'll see if that creates any problems later on. So we have our set content, and we are going to create a composable function, and our composable function is going to be called user screen. So we're going to have fun user screen, or we can call it our user application screen, and it's gonna be of a Jetpack compose. So we're gonna make it composable, and then inside of this, because remember that we are going to get a list of users from the database, so we want every time a new user is added, the database to change. So we're gonna have val users equals remember. We're gonna use remember, and we're gonna pass in some mutable states list of, and it's gonna be that of a string. So mutable state list of. We're gonna pass in a string here because we're gonna be receiving a string, and then we're gonna have this here. Okay. Sorry. It's expecting that. So we have our val users equals remember. Then we also want to create a remember because we want the user to enter some information in, and then we'll be able to save that particular information in there. Okay. So one second. Okay, so we have val name by remember, then we have some mutable state of, and then we're going to pass in, we're going to say for it to be that at that particular moment. So val name by remember, I don't know why I've got two here, but yeah. And then we need to remember that we need to import, when you use remember, you have to import some remember states that it tells you to import. So if you right click on it, it may tell you that remember value only produced by calculation would be. So we have val name, we should have val name, and then we're gonna import some mutable states, get value, interpreter. So we have val name by remember. Next thing is we're going to create something to refresh our users every time we add a new thing to it. So ideally, when you add, you don't want to go off the screen, come back to see what you're going to see the new changes. So I'm just going to create a function inside our user screen called fun refresh users, and then we're going to have users dot clear. So we'll clear it each time, and users dot well, we can add a few things to it. We can say that add all, and then we can pass this DB helper that we created. For now, don't worry so much about this error. It's because I'm going to pass in the DB helper inside this user application screen. But because I haven't passed in here, that's why it's getting us the error. But I'm letting you add this code because we will use it later on. So we're going to add it, but I'm going to comment it out for now. But we'll still use it. I'm just adding it there so that later on you'll be able to see exactly why we use it. And then what we can do is we can have a column. We have to add the column. And then our column is going to have a modifier equals modifier.padding. Okay, you can say 16.dp, and then yeah, you can have this there. We have to import dp as well. And inside our column, we're gonna have some outline field. I'm sure majority of you have come across this now. Outline text field, and our outline text field is gonna have some value, some properties, and some of the properties it's gonna have is number one, it's gonna have value equals the name, because wherever the user enters, we want to store it. And then on the value change, we would change the name to whatever the user enters it into. And then we're going to have a label that's going to say text enter name. And then we're going to create a button, because a button is going to help us to be able to add our item to the database. So we have a text field, and then we also have a button. Inside our button, we're going to have an on click. So on click equals, and then in our on click, we're going to create a particular if statement, and that if statement is going to help us to be able to do the work we're going to do. So we can say if the name that is been entered is not empty, because we don't want the user to enter an empty. So we can say it's empty or not empty. It's not empty. We can use that. We can just say DB helper. Again, we haven't passed it through. DB helper insert user. Ideally, if we had imported it, we will be able to see the DB helper insert user. Now, let me show you why I did it this way so that you'll be able to understand this. So, we've added our DB helper at the top of this particular code because we want to pass it into the children functions. So in this particular case, if I just call user application, right, I can just pass in DB helper, which is great. And then inside my user application, I can just create I can now change this function to receive the DB helper. So we'll have DB helper, then we'll have, I think, database helper. So then in that case, you can see that the errors disappeared. And then what you can find is, if you do the power, I always call this the power of the dot, DB helper dot insert user, which is, remember the function that we created in the other file. So we can use that particular function, and then we can say name. We can pass in name in there. Now this code here, right, is great because we've literally been able to do what we're doing now. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm just going to, I'm going to finish off my button, and I'm just going to say text. I'm going to say add user. Beautiful. So this is what we have here. We have a user application screen where we haven't used this yet. for now, all we're doing is getting a value from a user. And when the user clicks on the button, we are going to get insert user. Okay? Now I'm going to run my emulator so that I will be able to show you exactly how this will work. Okay? Okay, so my emulator is now running. So remember that at the moment on screen, we haven't added anything for it to display. So we're not going to get anything displaying right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter a name inside. So I'm going to enter, let's say, code by. We're going to say add user. Now, when we add the user, it's telling us nothing, because we haven't actually put anything in place for it to return us with any type of information. So how do we know if our emulator is actually, our database actually working? Well, for that part, I'm going to do it in the next video. Okay.